Last week we began a new series based on the curriculum called Animate Faith. And that's really what the goal is, to see our faith come alive, to become animated. How can we do that though? Like what is it that we can see or do to have our faith come alive in a post-Christian world? We've been talking about what it means to live in a post-Christian world. Well, we really have to deconstruct our faith and then build it back up. We have to sort of tear it down, not in a negative way, but in sort of to try to understand where it came from, and then consciously build it back up. And then for those who perhaps don't have any faith, as we've been talking about, living in a post-Christian world, we have to give them the tools to build faith for the first time. And so last week we looked at the question, do you believe in God? What do we mean by belief in God? Because most people were raised to believe in God, and belief in God was assumed. And today, however, many people are raised without any reference to God at all. Many people don't believe in God today. And the thing about that is we all know what that's like, because all of us functionally disbelieve in most versions of God. You know, there's the way Judaism believes in and understands God. There's the way Islam believes and understands God. And we don't believe in those versions or depictions of God. And even within Christianity, we don't worry about the fact that there are many other ways that other Christians believe in God. Catholics believe God is one way, whereas Protestants believe God is a different way. In other words, there's, at least in terms of how we relate to God, or if not the actual way we understand what God is like. So I called on us last week to display humility and understanding in light of the fact that there are people who don't believe in God, because we sort of don't believe in other versions of God. We believe in the God that we understand. So instead of forcefully yelling at people to get them to believe what we know to be true about God, I encouraged all of us to take a step back and try to understand what we are exactly doing when we say we believe in God. What are we saying when we say we believe in God? What is God? As Brian McLaren will say in the video, in this Animate video that we're basing these messages on, we have no way of even speaking about God without using metaphors or images. That is to say, we imagine.
Now, I think that word imagine is central to speaking about God, because whenever we speak of God, we compare God to things we know, and those things become images for God. So we might use physical or functional images for God, imaging God as a rock or a shield or a fortress, or we might use personal and relational images for God, like a mother, father, friend, or king. Or we might use mysterious images of power and wonder for God, like water or fire or wind or light. We have no way to speak or even think about God apart from images like these. But our use of images for God puts us in a constant struggle, because if we aren't careful, we over-identify God with the image itself. So, for example, we might speak of God as king, but do we actually mean God is a literal king sitting on a literal throne upon his own literal gluteus maximus? Or if we speak of Jesus sitting at God's right hand, do we think God has two literal hands, left and right? If we speak of God's voice, do we think God has literal vocal cords that vibrate with literal breath expelled from literal lungs that breathe literal oxygen? I mean, when you begin to face these complexities, you realize why Christian thinkers and mystics have created two technical terms to describe two ways of thinking and speaking about God. In the cataphatic tradition, we emphasize that our images and words really can help us to conceive of God and relate to God. It means that we can talk about God. But in the apophatic tradition, we remind ourselves that God can never be reduced to images or contained by words. It means that reverent, loving silence is sometimes the most eloquent form of theology.
So what is God? Well, almost by definition, we can say that God is that which is beyond us, right? that which is beyond our limited understanding of knowledge. There's limits to our knowledge, and God sits outside of those limits, right? And yet, so think about that. He is transcendent. He is beyond the limits of our knowledge. And yet, many of us can say we've experienced God in our lives, right? And so he's actually also near to us. God is both transcendent and present in our lives because we've experienced his work, his presence in our lives. So what are we to do? Well, we can speak about God in metaphoric terms. In fact, every way that we speak about God is really just a metaphor or an image. I'll give you a few examples. God is our Father. Why do we say that? Well, because we experience God in the same way or in a similar way to the relationship between a father and a child. You know, he's near to us. He cares about us. He takes care of us and guides us, just as a loving human father does to their children. We also speak of God as our king. Why? Because he gives us his moral rules. He governs us. He is over us. But we also speak in terms of things like God being a consuming fire. And we think about the fact that God comes into our lives and he burns away our past, burns away our sins, and in him is the ability to become refined and to be the best version of ourselves we can be. And so God is a consuming fire in that way. Or we like to think of God as Holy Spirit. And we often don't realize the word spirit simply means wind or breath. And so just in the same way that the wind can push us towards something, God pushes us and gently pushes us maybe, but guides us and inspires us and motivates us, just as wind could possibly do that. These are all metaphors or images that we use to speak about God. But I don't think it makes sense, or it perhaps would even be an error to be too literal about these things. So in other words, there has to be a balance between the positive statements we make about God on the one hand, and as McLaren will say, the reverent wonder that we have for God on the other hand. In fact, McLaren brings up the cataphatic tradition versus the apophatic tradition. I'm actually not too familiar with these terms. They're Greek terms, and these traditions go back hundreds of years. So we'll let him explain that a little further, but let's not get too worried about that. I have a different way of thinking about it.
In the cataphatic tradition, we emphasize that our images and words really can help us to conceive of God and relate to God. But in the apophatic tradition, we remind ourselves that God can never be reduced to images or contained by words. It means that reverent, loving silence is sometimes the most eloquent form of theology. When we hold these two traditions in proper balance, we keep seeking God, reaching out to God, and relating to God, always remembering that God can never be fully grasped in hand or captured in a box or stuffed into the hip pocket of our tiny little minds. Some people overestimate how much their language can capture and contain God. They lose the needed balance in the direction of excessive certainty, and their faith resembles a fortress built on a mountain. Whether they're believers or atheists, these folks are equally certain of their own viewpoint, equally dismissive of everybody else's, and equally impervious to learning something new. Life for them becomes a war zone, and faith for them is reduced to a fight about who's more right. Other people make the opposite mistake. Their faith resembles an imaginary castle floating up in the clouds. Everything's highly speculative and theoretical and academic and very far removed from real life and daily experience. If fortress people reduce God to concrete facts, cloud people reduce God to foggy opinions. If fortress people turn faith into a vicious fight about who's more right, cloud people reduce faith to a kind of inconsequential leisure activity, like doing crossword puzzles or collecting refrigerator magnets or being wine connoisseurs. In between these extremes, the rest of us need a third alternative. We don't want faith to be a fight, and we don't want faith to be a fog. We want our faith to be a quest for God and with God.
So the cataphatic tradition versus the apophatic tradition, or as he put it in terms of these images, fortress faith versus cloud faith. But don't worry too much about those two Greek terms, because I prefer to think of it, what we're talking about here, as a balance between certainty and doubt. You know, some people are certain that they know what God is like, and they have plenty of ancient texts to back them up. And other people don't really know what God is like. They are doubtful about what God is like. And they are, in fact, skeptical about those ancient texts. You know, on the one hand, those who are certain can certainly use the Bible. That's what I'm referring to as the ancient texts, right? These are ancient witnesses to God's revelation to the people who lived long ago. And for some people, that's a powerful, something powerful to persuade them to believe in God and to be certain about what he is like. But that doesn't work for other people because they are skeptical of those very same ancient texts, the Bible, and therefore those things are not persuasive to believe in God or to believe or to know what he is like. And so there's a certain degree of doubt. And I think all of us, I know certainly I, go back and forth between these perspectives. Sometimes I'm certain about what God is like and what he is and how he interacts with us. And other times I'm quite maybe even confused, but certainly in wonder about what he is like. And I have to be humble and in awe in those moments. So as McLaren will show us, we should view faith as neither a fortress nor a cloud, but instead a quest, or you can say a journey, like a voyage on a ship.
We want our faith to be a quest for God and with God. For those of us who live in the zone of wonder and curiosity, faith and doubt, desperation and hope, maybe we could say that for us, faith is like a ship that we're sailing on. Our beliefs are like planks in the hull, and the trials and disappointments and enigmas of life are like the storms and icebergs and reefs that sometimes threaten to sink us. Sometimes old planks spring a leak and have to be replaced, often when we're far from shore. We might say that God is the source and the goal of our quest, and that God is the mysterious sea upon which we sail, and that God is the wind we raise our sails to receive. We might say that fellowship is what we experience with fellow travelers on our ship of faith. We might even say that theology is the necessary maintenance of the hull and decks and sails so that our ship stays seaworthy for generations to come. In all of this, of course, we need to remember that maintenance of the ship is not the point. The quest is our experience of and with God.
So we can view faith as a journey. And in fact, today's question is, how do you relate to God? Well, I think Brian McLaren in the video here, has given us a great starting point to answer that question. All of us are looking for that which is beyond us. Remember, that's what God is, that which is beyond us. But think in terms of our own personal lives and our own personal desires. We're longing for purpose, right? And we're wondering what is our purpose? Or we're longing for acceptance, and we want people to accept us for who we are and what we could be. And along those lines, we're looking for belonging, right? We're looking for hope. Is there more to life than just what's going on right now? Is there something beyond our current situation? And again, along those lines, we're looking for meaning. Is there a point to all of this? Or maybe you think, especially after something bad happens, or if somebody does something evil, there's a longing inside of us for a sense of morality or justice, and we want to see the good win out. All of these things don't come easily to us or naturally to us. It is that which is beyond us. And therefore, we can associate these things with God. I think in God are all of these things, right? Like in God, we can have purpose and acceptance and belonging and hope and meaning and morality and justice. And, we could take the time to go through each of those and find out exactly what that means. But let me just say this. If take me at my word that all of these things are in what we conceptualize as God, then is not the life of faith a journey towards God, to God? So, as he says in the video, we embark on a journey towards God. We pursue God, and we trust that we can reach him, right? And have all of those things I just mentioned. So that doesn't mean in this pursuit that everything goes perfectly. In fact, we face many challenges along the way. Life is full of challenging times. We're going through challenging times as a world right now, but individuals go through their own challenging times, and it makes us feel a whole host of things. We feel sad, right? We feel confused and angry. We're not sure what's going on, and it can put us into a pit of despair, right? Where we can feel this intense sadness or even anger. But what do? We don't give up. We keep going. We trust in God, and we show our faithfulness to him. And God has not left us to ourselves. He has given us a captain. And this is the great thing about this metaphor of, faith, the life of faith as a journey on a ship. Well, every good ship has a good captain, right? And Jesus is our captain. In fact, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. So we look to Jesus, and he has shown us, because he's already gone through that journey and gotten to the other side and is already receiving the benefits of being on the other side, so to speak. And so we look to him and we let him guide us. But we also look to others who are on the journey along with us, and that's what it means to be a part of a church. We're on this journey together, and we help one another. We encourage one another. And we also look to those in the past who have already gone on the journey. That's why we listen to the great theologians and thinkers, Christian thinkers of the past 2,000 years. We look to them and we're inspired by them or motivated by them. And in fact, that's what the work of theology is, as McLaren was saying in the video. It's sort of the maintenance on our ship. It helps us to understand, sort of what we should believe in and how we should interact with one another and get along and so on. So the point is this. We can use all of these great tools to continue on the journey of faith. But all of those things are great, but they're not the point. The point is God himself. The destination is God. And wonderfully, God is also with us on the journey. Because just as the wind in our sails will push us forward, or even the water itself will allow us to be pushed in the right direction, God is that which helps us to continue, right? He is the wind in our sails. He keeps us going through it all. And we get waves of motivation, of encouragement, and inspiration. It's not all the time, I often feel discouraged or unmotivated. I'm sure you feel the same way. But God is there every so often, and usually just at the right time, where we get waves of motivation and encouragement and inspiration.
Sometimes on my journey, I've experienced God in extraordinary ways, in dramatic surprises or soul-expanding insights or unexplainable mystical encounters. But more often, I felt God's reality in the simple encouragement of a friend, in the gentle inspiration of a sermon, or in the familiar ritual of the Eucharist. And I'd be less than honest if I didn't also say that at times I found myself in the spiritual doldrums, cast adrift and wondering if the wind would ever blow again. But through it all, I find myself between unfathomable depths above me and unfathomable depths below me, captured by the call of the sea and the thrill of adventure, which are for me beautiful images for God, whose grandeur and wonder surpass all words.
He keeps us going, and it is indeed, that is what it means to be in a relationship with God, is that he is the one that keeps us going, and he helps us to trust in him and be faithful. So I ask you, all of you who are watching this, are you open to God in your life? Are you open to experiencing him? Again, you might not know exactly what that means, but as McLaren says in the video, sometimes it's in the quiet moment, in prayer, and a thought comes to your mind that gives you inspiration or hope. Sometimes, hopefully, it's somebody like a pastor preaching or giving you a teaching, and you are inspired in some way. Hopefully, it's during a song. You know, I've been playing the song Magnificent by U2 before the service these past couple weeks, and yeah, there are people who don't like U2, like my wife, but I happen to love that band and love that song, as it's a wonderful song about God and his grandeur and Bono's relationship to God in that song. You know, and that when I listen to that song, and especially because they're such great musicians and the music is wonderful, but the lyrics are powerful too, and it really inspires me every time I listen to that. You know, it's fair to say that is God in that moment. God is touching my heart in that moment and helping me to keep going. And that is just one small example in a whole host or list of plenty of examples we could give. God works through people and through things in this world. So I encourage you, especially if you've never even given a thought to having faith, that you are open to God. And so I ask, are you open to God? Are you open to his presence in your life in some way, in various ways, you know? Or do you want to just keep living in your own little bubble, your own little world, focused on yourself or your own situation? Or do you want to open your mind, open yourself up to something greater than yourself, and find in him purpose and meaning and acceptance and belonging and hope and all the great things that can be found in him? I encourage you, join us on this journey. You know, if you don't live in the area, and you can find a local church to be a part of, that's fantastic. But if you want to continue to follow us here on YouTube and online, that's wonderful too. And better yet, if you're in the area, why not join us in person, become a part of our church here in Fonthill? We'd love to partner with you on this journey. We want to experience God together and individually as well. So I encourage you to go on that journey with us.